infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Welcome to another episode of Into the Fray. If you're new here, I hope you're enjoying it enough to head to your podcatcher of choice to rate and review the show. This helps it aggregate across the listening platforms, which will turn into more people willing to come on and share their encounters. If you've been listening for years, I'd ask that you please do the same. Home base for Into the Fray is intothefrayradio.com. There you will find all episodes, blog posts, and get bonus content info. Speaking of that bonus content, on top of the free weekly show, I also produce bonus content for Patreon and Apple Podcast Premium. On either platform, you get all bonus audio episodes and early releases, each one ad-free, of course. Full disclosure though, Patreon has a bit more in the way of perks because of their interface. Over there, you will get video versions of patron-only chats, the private Discord channel, and merch at certain pledge levels. So head to patreon.com/intothefray or your Apple Podcatcher app to sign up for bonus content today. You can find me on the big three social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The Linktree link in each of my bios will take you to all the places you want to venture regarding ITF, including Small Town Monsters documentaries, various ways to listen to the show, Beyond the Fray books, contact info for me, and more. And lastly, and really honestly, most importantly, if you'd like to share your encounter or encounters on Into the Fray, the best way to get in touch is by emailing me at shannon@intothefrayradio.com. And without further ado, let's get to the interview. So on this episode of Into the Fray, I welcome Ian on from across the pond. I'm very excited. He's got some great encounters and stories to share with us today. So Ian, welcome on the show. You're from East London, but now you live in West Cork, Ireland, but you say you've also lived in Sweden and even the county of Essex. Now, you mentioned in your email that you're now an avid paranormal fan, and we were talking a little bit about that before we officially started here, but this was not always the case. You were not always into this stuff. So, I mean, I suppose it begs the question, and it's probably a good place to start, is when did this all begin for you?
Well, hi, Shannon. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I guess the very first experience that happened to me is what kicked it all off, and that was back in 1989. Obviously, we'll come on to that in a little while. But as you say, I was never really a big believer in the paranormal or, you know, things that go bump in the night, UFOs, all the things we're going to talk about today, you know. But then these experiences, I lived them. They happened to me. I can't explain them. And ever since then, I've had a very sort of vested interest, if you want to call it that, and you know, like a real sort of belief that there's more out there than we currently understand, if that makes sense. So that's really where it comes from.
So when you were younger, I mean, and we were talking a little bit about this before we officially started, but so when you're a kid growing up in East London, did you come across, like, do people have ghost stories they tell, or in school, is there like creepy books that you can see about paranormal and supernatural things? So it didn't really even cross your path that much?
Well, yeah, the usual standard childhood fare, if that makes sense. So, like, you'd hear ghost stories and strange occurrences from, say, grandparents and friends, and even teachers at school. Of course, we had like the school I attended in where I lived in East Ham was a big old Victorian 3-story building, and that was pretty spooky. And there was a staircase in the school that everyone said was haunted. And, like, if you had to take a letter between teachers, for example, you'd be a little bit nervous about using that particular staircase when everyone else was in class. So there's lots of stuff like that. I mean, there was just to the south of where I lived in East Ham, you've got the old like London Docks area, which is all now being redeveloped. But when I was a kid, it was all pretty much derelict. And there's an old hotel, which is still there. It's actually been refurbished now, but it was derelict when I was a kid. It's called the Galleons Hotel. And to us, it looked like almost like Dracula's castle, if you want. And there was supposed to be a ghost in there. I can't remember if it was supposed to be like a white lady or something like that, or a headless woman or something like that, because everyone you knew had been in there and seen the ghost. I never did. I've been in there, but I never see the ghost. So yeah, there is definitely a sort of like how can I put it, like almost like a heritage, if you will, of spooky stories and stuff in that region. And also I think some of it comes from the fact that, like, it was quite heavily bombed during World War II because of the docks, and, like, obviously the German Luftwaffe wanted to cut off any supplies coming into the UK, and that was one of the major ports at the time, the Port of London. So the whole area was devastated by bombs, and thousands of people lost their lives in that area. And so there's echoes of that as well, like, where houses once stood before the war, a new block of flats might have gone up. And I remember a block of flats where one of my friends lived, actually, and there was rumours of a ghost in the basement there of someone that had been killed in a bombing raid. Again, hearsay or not, I don't know. But so yeah, there was quite a healthy history of that, I would say, Shannon.
Well, yeah, and as I just briefly mentioned during the intro, you're from East London, but you do live now in West Cork, Ireland. And again, talking before we started, but we were talking about the Sophie murder. I don't even try to say her whole name because I'll sound like a silly goose. But the Netflix doc, Sophie, A Murder in West Cork, that came out in like 2021, I believe. But as I've mentioned, I've watched it a couple of times. It's very haunting. It's a true crime documentary. She was murdered. It's not a spoiler. But considering the fact that I of course I love the paranormal, I love cryptids, but I also love true crime. I consume a lot of that content as well. I announced on my social media sites that I'm, for Patreon and Apple Podcast Premium, I'm actually going to finally dip my toes into the true crime, mysterious disappearances, just random mysteries. Along that vein, I titled that show Unraveled, Murder and the Missing. So, I mean, even the murder of Sophie, I'm like, I was so struck by that case that seems like one that might be a good thing to take a dive into if people haven't watched that doc. And you say that just really quickly because you mentioned this in your email when I brought this up, the murder of Sophie, is that Ian Bailey is still kind of around that area, which is surprising to me because the jury is out on whether maybe he did do something or not, but the fact that he's still there, I'm like, my goodness, you would think that some people would want to move as far away as possible.
We saw him last week, actually, in a local supermarket. He I would say he sort of cuts a bit of a forlorn figure these days. I would say is probably fair to say, but it's a very contentious subject in the area where I live, and people don't really like to talk about it. And so, I sort of hesitate to sort of put my sort of like two penneth in, if you want to say that. But it's I don't think we'll ever really get to the bottom of that case. Who knows what happened on that night? I mean, obviously, poor lady lost her life in the most tragic and horrific of ways, but I don't think the truth will ever out of that in that case, to be honest with you.
I do have to say, though, I mean, if Ian had nothing to do with it, I feel just about as bad as I could for a human being, considering what he's gone through and is likely still going through. So I will just say that. So anyhow, if you guys are interested, go check that doc out. I just wanted to say that really quick, Ian, because you and I had a little back and forth about that on email, because you actually live in this place, but I was just so taken aback by that documentary and that murder in particular for some reason. So, also, just really quick, sorry. Also, the strange connection with several of her family members. There is almost like a paranormal connection besides the lady in white. Go watch the doc. You guys will know what I mean. But several of her family members realized that she had a really bad feeling about going, and some of them even said, don't go, like, stay here, something's not good, because she's French. She was in France and then was going to Ireland, right? So that was another strange side to this case.
Yeah, definitely. I'll have to reacquaint myself with the documentary. I watched it when it first came out, but some of the details you're talking about, I'm like, oh God, I don't remember that. But I'll have to. It's a very good documentary. To watch.
It is, and I'll stop yakking about it. But I'm obviously not paid by Netflix to promote the Sophie a murder in West Cork. But everybody should watch that if you're at all interested in true crime, and you can form your own opinion on what happened there. Okay, so we're gonna start with. I would assume we're going to go in order as you did in your email, which was fantastic. Sure. We're going to go back to 1988 in central London. And it's up to you, Ian. I tell everybody this as specific as you want to get with, because in the email you said where you were working and where what particular area of central London. That's up to you. I mean, now we're recording, so as specific as you want to be or non-specific, totally up to you. But the year is 1988, and we are talking about London.
I was I would have been 16, 17 at the time, and I was working for a company. So okay, I can tell the name of the company because they don't exist anymore. But it was a photographic company called Studio 10, and they were based in a building which is like I think the building was constructed in about 1850 or something like that. It's in the sort of like neo-Gothic style. So it's quite a sort of creepy looking building. And it's on the corner of the Farringdon Road and a little street called Greville Street, just a couple of 100 metres from the station, really. I got a job there as, it's called an E6 processor. So basically it's a machine that sits in a dark room, which has large tanks of photographic chemicals in it. And the film that you want to develop is attached in the dark to a framework, and the framework is then loaded onto the machine, and the framework is lifted through these series of baths and comes out at the end in the drying cabinet into the light. And this process takes about an hour. So I'd done my training and everything, and there I was working away on the E6 machine. And the company that I worked for, they did a lot of work for like newspapers and magazines and that. So we had sort of a 24-hour service, if you will, that we used to service all the newspapers just up the road at Fleet Street, and all the famous newspapers like the Sun and the Mirror, and you might have heard of, might not have heard of. But so we used to get sort of quite busy at night time as well. Anyway, so I was on a night shift this particular night, and it was around about the time of my birthday, so I would have been going on 16/17 at this point. So it was near the end of October, beginning of November. So it was, I remember like the weather was a bit rubbish, raining, typical London. So there I was at work, and I turned up, the day shift left, and then I was left there on my own with one other colleague, a chap called Bernard. And he used to work a thing called a copy camera, which is a great big camera with lights on it, where you'd put like a piece of artwork or something you wanted to copy, obviously, onto it, and then be photographed by the copy camera, and then that film would be brought down to me, and I would put it through the process, the development process. So it must have been, I reckon, about 2:00 in the morning, and Bernard came down to me, and he gave me a box of film. And the film comes in sheets, and it's about 11 by 14 inches, these sheets of film. So it's quite a large box, cardboard box, light tight cardboard box that it comes in. Anyway, he's given me this box, and I was having a cup of tea or something at the time. I said, yeah, give me a minute, I'll put it on. And he disappeared back down toward his dark room. In the meantime, I've finished my tea, I've got the film, I've gone into the dark room. Now, the way you enter this dark room is actually quite interesting. It's called a light lock, and the door, it's like a cylinder shape with a door cut in the front, if you can imagine. And you step into the door, and then you pull the cylinder around you, so the door opening swivels around and opens onto the dark side of the dark room, so no light can get into the room at all. So it's pitch black; you can't see a thing. Okay, so I've entered the dark room, and it was like walking into a freezer. Now, bearing in mind the baths on this machine are heated, and normally there was a very pathetic air conditioning system in this room, and it could never keep up with the heat of the heated baths on the machine. So it was always like walking into a sauna, if you like. Anyway, I've walked in, and it's freezing, absolutely freezing, and I panicked. I thought, oh no, the machine's broken down. I'm going to be in trouble, you know. And I've come back out of the light lock, and on the wall were a series of digital displays that gave you the temperature of the baths and the ambient temperature in the room and everything was reading normal. So I sort of thought, well, that's a bit odd, obviously. Went back into the dark room, and again, it's like an absolute freezer, you know, really cold, like really very cold. So I'm trying to sort of put this out of my mind, if you like, and dismiss it as just one of those things, you know. And so I hung the mounting frame for the film up on the wall, and I proceeded to unbox the sheet film from its light tight box. And the film has to be clipped on to its very edges, and so it's held taut and square on the frame for when it goes through the processor. So I've put the first clip on. Now, bearing in mind this is completely in the dark, you can't see a thing. I've put the first clip on, and suddenly I'm getting goosebumps now just to let you know, it still has this effect on me, you know, 34, 35 years later. This presence is the only way I can describe it. Walked up behind me, or I say walked, glided, whatever. It approached me in the dark. And I'm quite a tall bloke. I'm about 6'3". And whatever this thing was, it towered over me. And I had the feeling in the darkness that it was stooping over me, and its face, if you want to call it that, what would have been its face was right sort of between the nape of my neck and my right ear, if that makes sense. And so, like, all my hackles went up. If I can use that analogy, you know, all my hairs on my arms, hairs on my head. It literally was a hair-raising experience. And at that moment, I thought Bernard, my colleague, had snuck back into the dark room and was going to try and frighten me. And so I'm flailing around with my right arm behind me, and there's no one there. And yet this presence was still there. So my arm was having no effect on whatever this thing was, you know. And so I'm like, I'm just going to get this rest of this film clipped onto this frame, and I'm out of here. And so I clipped the second frame on. I clipped the second clip on. I went to clip the third clip on, and the whole sheet of film was violently pulled out of my hand. And I mean, to say I was frightened is an understatement, really. I was like a hamster in a wheel in the light lock in the door, you know, straight out. The film's gone on the floor somewhere, I suppose, you know, straight out. And I've gone right around the machine and then down the corridor to where Bernard's darkroom was. And there was no way for Bernard to get past me. This is one single narrow corridor. Goes past about 3 or 4 doors, which are all locked at that time of night for different dark rooms, down to his dark room. And I banged on the door, and he was in the dark room. He opened the door, and he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Bernard, there's something in the dark room." I mean, you know, as I was saying it, I knew I sounded crazy, you know. And he went, "What do you mean there's something in the dark room?" I said, "You'll have to come down to the dark room and go." So I marched him down to the dark room, and I said, go in there, Bernard." And he went through the light lock. And he was only in there a couple of seconds, and he came out, and he was as white as a sheet. You know, at that moment, he knew that there was something off in that room. And he went, "It's like a freezer in there." I went, "Yeah, I know." And he's gone over to the digital readouts for the thermometers on the wall, and I can see the puzzlement on his face. And then we both looked at each other, and I said, "I think we should turn the light on." And he went, "Yeah." And so that's what we did. We turned the light on and we went back in. The temperature was back to normal. There was the film on the floor. There was the frame hanging off the wall at an angle where there was 2 mounting hooks that it used to sit on. It was hanging off at an angle. Now, I don't know if the presence, if you want to call it that, did that, or whether I sort of jumped and knocked it off or whatever, but it was hanging there at an angle, and temperature was back up to normal, and the oppressive feeling within the room had gone, and it frightened me so much I wouldn't go back in the dark room that night. And so a couple of days later, when I returned on the day shift after the following weekend, I got a proper telling off by my boss. And so, if you do that again, you're going to be fired and all the rest of it. And then, quite out of the blue, my boss actually said to me, you're not the first person to experience it. He'd experienced it himself. And he said, yeah, it's quite disconcerting. Yeah, and that was my first real introduction into the sort of a paranormal event or paranormal experience that I had. And it was very, very scary, to be honest. I can't explain it. So...
yeah, I'd say that would just about do it. Yeah. I mean, it's great that you and Bernard had the same. So Bernard, though, he went in and he felt the freezing cold aspect of the room, but he didn't actually feel anything, or nothing interacted with him, right?
Nothing interacted with him, but I could tell by the look on his face that he knew there was something off in there.
Right.
If that makes sense,
Right.
When you just get that horrible feeling. He come out, he didn't look comfortable at all. Just put it that way. He had a real look of sort of consternation, almost fear on his face. And when I said, let's turn the light on, he was all for it, even though he'd just given me that piece of film and he'd have to now go back and reshoot that, and take get extra work for him. He was quite open to turning the light on in the dark room. So, yeah, it was quite disconcerting. But that building's actually built on some, like, I suppose you call them like catacombs, which sit under the building, and they're very old. The catacombs, they run back towards Farringdon Station, and they must be much older than the building we worked in, if that makes sense. So there was rumours. I don't know how true they are, that there were plague pits in the vicinity. So again, I'm just sort of extrapolating here, really, but. Do you know what a plague pit is?
I could guess, but I was going to ask you to expand upon that if you would.
Yeah, of course. So London is riddled with plague pits, and what they are mass burial sites for people who died of the plague back in 1665, the year before the Great Fire of London, which was obviously in 1666, which actually had a big cleansing effect on London and actually killed off most of the plague in London. So although it was a very tragic event, and lots of people lost their property and lives in the Great Fire, it actually was probably a good thing, that it happened to rid London of a lot of the sort of, the Black Death, as it was known back then. And so, all over London, when building works are occurring, they often find these plague pits, which are unmarked, and contain hundreds, if not thousands, of bodies that died of the plague and were just literally chucked into a pit with quicklime and buried, So there was rumours that these catacombs were sort of there was like a plague pit sort of had been found down there and all the rest of it. I don't know how true that is, I've got to be honest, but it makes a good story. So
quite the history, right? So
yeah.
Now you're 6'3". You are, as you say, you're tall, and this thing you could feel it was towering over you and having to hunch down so that you could kind of feel what you felt was its face right next to your neck. Now, we don't know what happens when someone passes away. We don't know if, and say it's a grumpy person or even a bad person, an evil person, the person that killed Sophie. Say that, a person like that passes on, maybe they can... I've changed shape, just sounds like a silly way to explain it, but that's basically what I'm getting at. Who knows if you stay the same shape and size or if you can change shape, right? But where I'm going with this is, do you feel like it was a human being that had passed on and was interacting with you, or this was a non-human entity?
Latter, I would say. The latter. The picture I always build in my head of what it was, right? And this is going to sound a bit daft, but you've seen in the movie Nosferatu,
Mm-hmm.
yeah? That. But in my mind's eye, that's what was leaning over me in the dark. I'm not saying it was a vampire or anything like that, but it was malevolent. Whatever it was, there was a malevolent feel to it. It wasn't like a pleasant feeling that, there's a presence in here with me. It wasn't that at all. It felt to me like this thing wanted me out of the room. It didn't want me there. So its way of doing that was to walk up behind me, let its presence be felt, and really get up sort of close to me, really close, like almost like breathing down my neck, if you will. It was really quite a horrible feeling.
I mean, its posture and how it came upon you was extremely aggressive and scary enough, but then it actually had enough energy to physically interact with something in that room, which was just the coup de grace for you. I do not blame you for being like, you know what, I'm not really probably doing the rest of what I'm supposed to do tonight at my job because of this.
Yeah, it was honestly, I don't want to sort of over-egg the pudding, so to speak, but it was a very, very disconcerting experience. Very disconcerting. I remember coming home that night, early hours in the morning. I remember getting home because one of the perks of the job, we used to get a free taxi home, free cab home. And I remember I said to Bernard, I'm not going back in there, blah, 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 I'm going home. And I called a cab, and that's quite a drive actually from like Farringdon, where the company was, to East Ham, where I lived at the time. And I remember getting home, and my mum was still up, and I remember telling her the story, and she loves anything like that, my mum. So she was lapping it up, to be honest. And she still mentions these stories I'm telling you tonight. I mean, obviously she was involved in one of them, so we'll come to that later. But yeah, she still often mentions them. George, you remember that when that happened, and you were telling me all about that, And she, when I knew I was coming on here to speak to you, Shannon, she said, what are you going to talk about? And I told her the events I wanted to talk about. And she said, I remember you coming home that night. And the same thing applies actually to the second story I'm going to tell you in a minute. But she could see on me that I'd had a traumatic experience, if that makes sense. I was full of nervous energy and quite sort of pale. My pallor was quite pale and that, So she understood that I wasn't lying, to put it bluntly.
Yeah, and at least you had the confirmation from your boss. I mean, he was a little ticked off at you for not finishing your duties that night, but at least he said, well, you're not the only one that's had that experience. It is of interest, and there'd be no way to know now, of course, but if there was any kind of a pattern, at time of year, or was it always at night, is something of a pattern, if there was ever anything that was uncovered for when this entity would show itself in essence.
No, I couldn't say that there was, because I didn't have that sort of in-depth conversation really with anyone else in regards to this at work. The last thing I wanted to do really was walk around asking people, have you experienced a ghost in the dark room? You stand up and, well, in that case, I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't work there for that much longer after that. Actually, I left for another reason, but I was young, I got bored with the job, I just fancied to do something else, so yeah, it was. I can't attest to whether there was a pattern to this appearance or manifestation of this presence. But yeah, all I know is that the boss confided with me after he told me off that several people, including himself, had experienced it, and it wasn't pleasant. So make of that what you will, really.
Yeah, I can only imagine in the lunchroom be like, hey, Bob, you've ran into that 7-foot-tall non-human entity in the dark room, right? How about that? That sucks, doesn't it?
Just the sort of it wasn't a physical entity. It had
right.
like you earlier. It had enough energy to be able to pull that piece of film out of my hand, and violently so. It wasn't just like a light tug on the film, and I panicked and dropped it. It wasn't that at all. It literally, imagine holding a piece of paper, piece of A4 paper, let's say, and you're gripping it quite tightly in your thumb, forefinger in your left hand, and I come up and snatched it out of your hand. It was that level of sort of violence really that happened, and it was quite the experience, to be honest. But that was really my first introduction into strange happenings, and I couldn't I sort of couldn't reconcile it with myself, if you know what I mean. I knew it had happened, but I couldn't really get my head around it. It was a very strange thing to try and come to terms with, to be honest with you, for someone that really didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or poltergeists or whatever moniker you want to give it, really, you know.
Yeah, and I wonder if it was attracted to you somehow, or if it was just someone else on shift that night, if they would have had the exact same experience.
Yeah, it almost felt to me like it was laying in wait, if that makes sense, thinking back. Like it decided to go in there, knowing that I'd probably go back in or someone else would go in there. You know, in real terms, it'd only be me. And it would decided to sort of lay in wait if it was intelligent, if you know what I mean, if it had a will of its own. I don't, who knows? Who knows? It was just very, very odd.
But the other experiences, and I don't even know if he went this far into it. I know you didn't ask a lot of questions. I don't blame you. But were the other experiences all in the dark room as well, or other parts of the building?
No, actually, that's an interesting point. No, they weren't all, because there were probably 24 dark rooms in this building. So, because it was a big commercial enterprise, you know, it wasn't like when you take your snaps into the local chemist. It wasn't like that at all. It was a big commercial enterprise. Like on the sort of, it was like not a full basement, if you know, it was like a half basement down there. They had a great big, bearing in mind this is the 80s, they had a great big imaging computer. It was huge. It was about as big as your front room. You know, like what you can do on an iMac now. But it was a huge, you know, it was a large commercial entity. This company, and I do believe that the happenings, if you want to call them that, or the experiences, weren't confined just to the dark room that I worked in. They'd been experienced in other areas of the building, so far as I could tell. So I suppose that would indicate a level of intelligence, or you know, from whatever it was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a creepy one. I do not blame you for noping on out of that one. No, so this next one is we're really going to switch gears here. And, you know, honestly, I wasn't expecting this to, you know, come out when we first touched base and where you are. But, you know, and it's of high controversy if this thing is over there. But I love talking about this no matter what. So, yeah, I'm not even gonna tease more than that. I'll just let you get into this next experience.
No problem. Oh, just before we start with this one, I just will say, like I said to you in the email, you know, obviously the story I've just told you, I've lost touch with Bernard. The company's not trading anymore, so I can't. There are no sort of witnesses, inverted commas, to this. But the rest of the stories that I'm going to tell you, I have witnesses that experienced these things with me. You know, when you tell people these stories, it sounds almost fantastical, you know, and you're thinking no one's ever going to believe this, but the fact that there are witnesses to all of the stories, you know, my parents, my wife, some of my best friends, it really sort of lends a bit of credence to the tales, if you know what I mean, that they can be backed up and witness testimony can be given. So anyway, yeah, the second story, which is out of all of them, this was the most terrifying, to be honest with you. It was like to a guttural level, if that makes sense. It was absolutely terrifying. So fast forward about a year, it was probably about a year after the previous happening, like we've touched on earlier in the conversation. I was born and lived in East London. I had three sort of real good mates, two Pauls and one Neil, if that makes sense. And we decided one night that we were bored and we were going to do a bit of night fishing. And the place that we were going to go and do the night fishing is a place called Wanstead Park, and it's a remnant of a large hunting forest called Epping Forest, where the English kings and queens used to hunt deer and boar and things like that. And it's like there's a park called the Lee Valley and the Roding Valley. These are two rivers that run down tributaries to the Thames. Both of these valleys, the Epping Forest comes down, and Wanstead Park is like the southernmost tip of the remnant of Epping Forest, if that makes sense. And when I was a little boy, like it still had like common grazing rights. So the farmers out from Essex would bring their cattle to roam all the way across Wanstead Flats, which is a big open area, and Wanstead Park itself. And that they don't do that anymore. That was stopped because of obviously London being quite busy, like road traffic accidents and that with the cattle and stuff like that. But I remember it when I was a kid, in the 70s and stuff. So we decided we were going to go and fish in Wanstead Park. Now the park itself has got several lakes in it, and it was actually part of a ornamental garden at one time for a big house called Wanstead House. Your listeners can look all this up online. It's quite interesting. And it was rumoured to have rivaled the Palace of Versailles at one time. But the house fell into disrepair. I think there was financial issues. This was back in sort of like the mid-19th century. The house fell into disrepair. It was the house was basically demolished and used for building materials elsewhere. But the ornamental lakes and some of there's a place called the Glade. It's like a great big meadow that stretches down to the ornamental lakes. That's all still there, which was part of the grounds of the house. So we decided to go into Wanstead Park, which is very heavily forested, and do a bit of night fishing. So the four of us, we jumped in my mate's car. We drove down to the back entrance of the park, and we walked right the way through the park to the ornamental lakes near a place called the Grotto, which is like an old ancient boathouse type thing. It's in disrepair now, like a ruin. Anyway, we set up our fishing equipment, put our rods in the water, and we're sitting there and we're chatting away. And we weren't catching a thing. There was nothing biting. So we decided we're bored. So we decided, let's go for a walk. So we're going to do one lap of these ornamental lakes, as they're called, which is probably about a sort of 25, 30-minute walk around the lakes. Come back, pack up and go home, So this was a Friday night, actually. So we're off on our stroll, and I had a large fishing torch. It was my dad's. The other two lads, they didn't have a torch. And my other mate Paul, he had a fishing torch. So there was two of us with a flashlight, I suppose you'd call it, over in the US. But we had torches. Me and my mate Paul, the other Paul and Neil didn't. Okay, so we're walking along this quite a wide gravel path in the forest. We're chatting away. Cars, girls, you name the topic. Young sort of like teenage lads talk about. We got to where a path forks, and I just happened to shine my torch at the apex of the fork, like the bushes at the apex of the fork, and staring back at me was these large round eyes, and I couldn't really process what I was seeing, because obviously over in the UK, especially in London, we don't have big animals like bears or mountain lions or anything like that. The largest thing we have is like a fox or a badger, And these eyes were staring at me, and they were about 3 or 4 feet, I would estimate, off the ground. And what I could make out around the eyes was like a very deep sort of russet red fur, if that makes sense, around the eyes. And the next series of happenings all happened almost like instantaneously. Right, so I've shone the torch and I've gone, like, what the hell's that, like, And my two mates in the middle that didn't have the torches, they've gone, get it, like that. And my other mate, who was standing probably 10 feet to my right, he's turned with his torch, and we caught this thing in the crossed beams of the torch. And what was standing there was a very stocky, shaggy furred humanoid figure, and very short legs, longer torso, long arms. And my two mates that have just shouted, get it, maybe they've got 2 strides into their sort of run towards this thing. And it let out this bizarre sort of, it was like a guttural growl with like a hiss, like a long hiss, if that makes sense. My two mates have like slid over on the gravel, obviously in fright of this thing sort of like, reacting. We all took off running. I mean, it was, oh, sorry, I forgot to add, when it made the sound, it bared its teeth, and it had extremely long canine teeth. I always remember that, as clear as day. I can see it in my mind's eye now. And so we took off running, and whatever this thing was, it chased us. But it didn't chase us on the path. It was in the bushes at the side of the path. So it was smashing through the undergrowth, and you could see I remember looking back over my shoulder with the torch. I'm running in one direction, looking back over my shoulder with a torch, and you could see all the bushes and trees moving, and it was terrifying. And we're running, and we ran out onto a part of the park which is it's more like a heathland, if that makes sense. Now this was summer, So the grass was very dry and quite long. So we've managed to get out into the middle of this sort of heathland area. And I think it was me actually went, get down on the floor. Like, we got down on the floor, turn the torches out. And we just laid there. And my friend Neil, I felt so sorry for him. He was sobbing. He was absolutely in pieces. And he's a tough bloke, but he was so frightened. And the rest of us were not far behind him, We were terrified. Whatever this thing was, you could hear it moving around in the tree line, and it would rustle. It would violently sort of shake bushes, and you could hear twigs snapping and bits and pieces like that. And we must have laid there. I honestly can't remember now, but we must have laid there for a good hour at least, at least, before this thing, whatever it was, quietened down and sort of seemed to disappear. And then we had the horrible dawning realisation that we've got to go back the way we'd just come to get back to our fishing gear and pick up our fishing gear. And then we've got to go back through the forest the other way, back to the car. And we must have laid there a good hour, maybe more, maybe 2 hours. I can't remember really now. So it was 34 years ago, but we laid there, and the courage that we had to muster to go back into the forest, I can't even begin to describe, but we did it. We didn't have there was no further interaction with whatever this thing was. And we made it back to the car. Of course, I've gone straight home. I woke my parents up to tell them. My dad, he was like, oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, how much have you had to drink? Rolled over, went back to sleep. My mum was up, made a cup of tea. Tell me all about it, Anyway, the next day, my mate Paul, he came round in his car, and I was still in bed asleep. And she interrogated him as to what had happened the night before. And he told her basically the same thing, And so there we are. But we obviously told all the rest of our group of friends, and they were like, oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Again, how much you've been drinking, all this. We hadn't had a drop, And so about a week later, we decided that we were going to go and find this thing and catch it. So honestly, what a bunch of clowns. We had air rifles, knives, baseball bats, everything. And we made it about 100 yards in the gate before we all panicked to run out again and left the scene. But so, yeah, no, sorry. Did you say something? Sorry.
No, I didn't. No, I am grinning though, listening, because I can see kind of you're like, oh, we're forming the posse. It's the get it again. I love it.
Yeah, full of bravado. That didn't last long at all, honestly. But yeah, and that was that. But there have been, I think I sent them to you on the links on the email. There have been several sightings of a strange creature around that area, including a hairy Bigfoot, they've called it, about the same size as what I saw back in 1980. I think I'm trying to remember now what links I sent you. There was some wild, hairy, howling thing or something on Hackney Marshes, which is just up the road from Wanstead Park. And the police were actually called, and they said they had no doubt that the lads that saw this thing were not telling the truth. They believed them completely. So much so that they actually brought marksmen and a helicopter up over Hackney Marshes to try and find out what this thing was. And then more recently than that, I believe another guy. There's another part. It's not actually part of Wanstead Park. It's called the Hollow Ponds area. It's called. It's near Snaresbrook Crown Court. And he saw what he described as a bear in the forest. So I can't say honestly, Shannon, whether it was like a cryptid, if you want to call it that, something that is unknown to science, or whether it was an ape or something. That's the only logical thing I could think it could be, because of the shape of it, the way it behaved, and like I said to you in your email, that's all. To me, that's even potentially more frightening that it was let's say a chimpanzee, for example.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if we'd have frightened it, which we obviously did, took it by surprise, and it had caught one of us, we'd have been dead. It's as simple as that. And so, yeah, again, another extremely frightening encounter, event. I don't know what you prefer to call it, but it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And I was only talking to my friend. That's what really prompted me to sort of like drop you a line when I saw your post on Instagram saying, send me your stories. I was only talking to my friend Paul about this a few weeks ago, and we were just saying, I'll never forget it. I'll never, ever forget it. And I think about it quite regularly, to be honest with you. it's one of those things that had such an impact on me. It was it was very traumatic, very. So make of that what you will. So.
Well, as you say, if that was a chimp, and you mentioned in your email that especially back, you said a chimp or orangutan that may have possibly escaped from one of the many circuses that were held on Wanstead Flats back in those days. But the whole chimp thing, I mean, you'd be killed if you were lucky, probably, because if you look up, and you'll never forget the images, but if you look up what a chimp, and they look so kind of small and cute, and what they can do with their strength to just a human being's face is absolutely horrifying. And that is not a situation that you want to be in. So I don't blame, like your friend, you said he was sobbing. You guys are laying on the ground. I mean, that's a very dramatic scene, but it's fitting for what was going on. And you guys actually saw this thing. So also, thank you so much for sending all those links. I went through each one of those articles and I wanted to touch on those just a little bit more. And by the way, everyone listening, you can go to the website, go to this episode. On that episode is called The Show Notes, and I will link all of these articles that Ian was kind enough to send along. But so you mentioned the older happenings as far as when, they technically were kind of written down and started was the Hackney Monster 1980 to present is what the website London Urban Legends was saying that one. Some of them were 7 feet tall. I think there was a sighting in December of 1981. And then around that same time, they actually found 2 small bear carcasses in the water, and those bears were decapitated. And then police actually found footprints in the snow December 28th, I believe, of that same year. So that is slightly interesting. And then in 2012... there was not only some kind of a beast captured on camera, but then Helen Murray got 2 pictures of a shaggy black animal in the undergrowth. And the pictures are in the article. So again, go to the website, click on it. You could see it yourself. But it was dismissed quite quickly, it looks like, as being a Newfoundland dog. And you can look those up when they jump on someone that is quite tall, like yourself even. They're like face to face with someone. They're a huge dog, but and you can't really tell. It looks quite like hunched over in one picture. I will say it looked a little bit odd to be just dismissed as a dog, but hey, maybe it was. But Helen was very adamant that it did not move like a dog, and she was there. She took the pictures. Is why she took the pics, because it was weird to her. So that was the Hackney Monster. But the other 2 articles that you linked. November 11th, 2008, it's titled Wanstead is Bigfoot on the Loose. And of course, Bigfoot for both of these articles was in quotations, right? Michael Kent saw a hairy dark creature during an evening fishing trip. There you go. To Hollow Ponds in Epping Forest, 4 foot tall. He says it resembled a bear. And then 6 days later, and this is from the guardianseries.co.uk, both of these articles, 6 days later, they wrote about another experience, November 17th, 2008, same site, and quote unquote Bigfoot spotted again. But this time it was during the day, and this woman, Irene, actually ran into it in the street, just turning the corner from her flat, I believe, her apartment. And again, though, 4 feet tall, but she said it had big feet, which is, you're kind of going, oh, well, there you go. That's kind of something a little maybe odd. I wonder how big the big feet were, but she did admit it had animal eyes, and it leapt over a wall with no trouble at all. And if I remember correctly, she was upset enough that she kind of went around and started to ask people, like, did you see this? Like, I just saw this weird thing. But no, Ian, thank you so much for sending those along. I would have never even have thought to, after reading your email, to go and look and see if these hit mainstream news sites there in the UK and have been written about. And there is the corroboration there of the height, right? And if it's bold enough to just kind of walk out in the daytime, and it's jumping fences, and it's not just staying in the underbrush and throwing fits, then I mean, I would probably lean towards your theory, right? Of maybe this kind of escaped chimp or orangutan that can, I mean, if there were several of them, of course, they would have to procreate and then la la la. But then you have this population in the area that can kind of go undetected, I suppose. But
I would agree, but
yeah.
so I was just gonna say actually, because I think it was around 1974. I could be wrong. I don't know the exact year, but there was like a Dangerous Animals Act passed in the UK where before that you could own a tiger or a leopard or whatever. And I'm sure you're familiar with all the sort of big cat sightings over in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's never been proven that they're there, but they definitely are there. And the footprints are found and mutilated sheep carcasses and that. But before that date, you could go into Harrods and buy a chimpanzee or an orangutan or a tiger or something, which seems like absolutely ludicrous now. But and they reckon that when this law came in, the reason we have big cats, loose on Dartmoor and Exmoor, and I can actually tell you an anecdotal story about a big cat in a second, actually. But people basically, as the law came in, would literally take, I don't know, a leopard in the back of their estate car to a remote part of Essex, let's say, open the tailgate and let it jump out, and
God.
that's I don't have to. So yeah, I have a very good friend whose name I won't tell you because he's actually a local councillor. I don't want to sort of drag his name through the mud, if you know what I mean. But we used to work together. I used to live in a village in Essex called Earl's Colne. And there's another village at the bottom of the hill called Coningain, right? They're ancient sort of names from sort of like the De Vere family, I think, which were like Norman knights. So that's why the place name sounded a little strange. But there used to be a foundry in Earl's Colne. My mate, he worked in, he was a machinist at the time. He's a little bit older than myself. And the foundry closed, I think it was in 1998. So it was 1993. So it was pre-1993 when this happened. And he was on like late shift or night shift. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. He drove his car down the hill, and when you get to the bottom of the hill before you come into the village where he lived, you come round a bend in the road, and there's a grass embankment on the left, and on the right hand side is a small river that's been culverted in a concrete culvert, and then to the right of that is just a big field going up to trees further up. And he said he came round the corner of the bend in his car, and right in the middle of the road was a black panther. And he said that its shoulders were level with the bonnet of his car. He said it was huge. And he said in one leap, it jumped over this culverted river, which was probably about 4 feet wide, 5 feet wide, straight into the darkness into the field and was gone. And his routine at that time was to get home and then take the dog for a walk and then come home and go to bed. And he said he got in and he used to live with his wife at the time and his mother-in-law. And he said when he went in, his mother-in-law was up and she was like, God, you look like you've seen a ghost. And he said, I think I might have, And he wouldn't take the dog for a walk that night. He was too frightened to take the dog for a walk. So maybe not frightened, but too wary to take the dog for a walk. So there's an anecdotal story of a big cat in that area. And there's another village just along from there called Stystead. And there, again, back in the 80s, there was it was known locally as the Beast of Stystead that used to kill. No one ever saw it or caught it, but as far as I know, it would kill a lot of local livestock, and it had all the hallmarks apparently of a big cat, that was doing the killing. So I think personally these things do exist. I think going back to my story, I would lean that way as well, Shannon. I would say, from a sensible point of view, it was some kind of great ape, and we happened upon it, we frightened it, and it gave chase. I have to say, that. The way it chased us and then the way it stopped in the tree line and the way it was rustling the bushes and crashing about, it was almost like a territorial display, I would say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it was definitely throwing a fit that you guys were there.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, but there was no more vocalization. Like you obviously with like the Sasquatch stories and that you hear, you get a lot of this these vocalizations and stuff. There was no, apart from that sort of guttural growl with the hiss, there was no more vocalization from this thing. It was just pure sort of, I don't know, a disturbance of undergrowth and trees and stuff like that. There was no, but it was violent. Like, when you see a bush shake, it was really almost. You've seen chimps do it when they grab hold of like something and they really sort of shake it. It was like that. So yeah, quite scary.
Yeah, that's why I would hazard to say your theory is probably spot on, because it only takes 2 to make 4 to make 8, and these things they're very, they can figure things out. That's where they're supposed to be, is out in the woods and out in the bush. But I just cannot imagine back in those days, just as you say, you drive up and you then are like, yeah, I think getting a chimp would be a great idea as a pet. Oh my goodness me.
I'm sure, I could be wrong in this. Someone will probably correct us in the comments, or correct me in the comments, but I'm sure sort of like Jimi Hendrix, because obviously he lived in London at the time. I'm sure he had like a leopard or a tiger or someone like him. Someone in the rock scene, one of these sort of hedonistic rockers. I'm sure one of them had an exotic pet like a leopard or a tiger or something. But what's interesting as well in London is there's like, you get parakeets, like little green parakeets flying about in some locations.
Mm-hmm.
And again, apparently, legend has it. I'm probably going to say the wrong name now, but legend has it, someone in the rock fraternity, like Mick Jagger or David Bowie or something, had them as pets and let them go. I think it was Mark Bolan, T-Rex, I believe, and let them go. And they're sort of living and multiplying all around sort of South London, particularly now. So you can go in a park in South London, you'll see these little flocks of parakeets zipping about. It's quite weird.
It's funny you say that, because in certain states, and I have 2 of these birds, they're called Quaker parrots or monk parakeet. It might be the exact same species of bird. I'm going to look that up when we hop off. But in certain states in the United States, it is illegal to keep or even move through the state with a Quaker parrot, because of the fact that they are considered an invasive species, because they can just survive so easily and procreate so easily. And then they build these massive nests on the power line. So it just becomes just not a good, I'm sure there's other things they do that is not what the government says is not good. This is why you can't have them. But I know that's one of the reasons. So I'm wondering if that's the exact same kind of parrot. But yeah, it just doesn't take very much. And as Ian Malcolm, I suppose, would say, is life finds a way, right? I mean, they're not really maybe where they're supposed to be, but they figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, could there be a population of apes living in East London? I would say it's entirely possible, to be honest with you. Scavenging in bins for food, and, they could quite easily live alongside people, I would have thought, undetected. So, but there you go.
I mean, Ian, though, such a close call. Because I lean so hard towards it being a chimp that, but that is absolutely terrifying. So all of you guys still to this day will bring this up and go, "Oh my God, I can't believe that night was insane."
Yeah. I mean, just the other day I was talking with my mate, and we were both saying how terrified we was. To this day, I think that's probably one of, if not the most scary thing or frightening thing that has ever happened to me. I've been in plenty of, I think I told you on the email, I've played rugby, I've been a doorman, on nightclubs and that. I've had plenty of scary things happen to me, but that was a whole nother level. That was absolutely terrifying.
Did you guys, because I know that, a week later, the posse is formed and you're going to get it. Did that change your fishing habits? Did you guys ever go back there and go night fishing?
Never, ever. No, in fact, to be honest, when we weren't sort of great fishermen to begin with. My dad is an avid fisherman. We weren't. I think we were going through a bit of a fad with it, if you know what I mean. But having said that, there's no way you would have got me back in there night fishing after that anyway. Or
night anything. How about a stroll at Epping at the Ornamental Lakes? You're like, no thanks.
Yeah, no, I think I'll leave that. I'll be in the pub.
I like my face being where it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Really?
No,
You
and
know,
I'm not trying to
if
make light of what that chimp did
no,
to
not
her.
at all.
That was just,
Not at all.
oh my God, because it literally just ripped her entire face off. That's why I just don't get people that are like, yeah, let's
And
go
no
get a chimp and
yeah.
keep it at the house with the kids. And I'm like, what the hell are
Yeah.
you thinking?
Yeah, I know the case you're talking about. Actually, I've seen the pictures, and yeah, it's awful.
You
Awful.
can't, yeah. It once you see them, it's one of those things. You're like,
Yeah,
once you see it, you cannot go back. So, oh, look what happened to Siegfried and Roy. I mean, after decades of working with those same cats, and of course, it's up for debate. Some say that it was trying to protect him and drug him off stage for that reason. But either way, he was, that pretty much ended that whole thing, and he was extremely injured after that. So, yeah, not good.
Do you want to progress on to the?
Yes, I was just going to go there because we are switching gears and subjects again with actually a couple more fantastic stories.
So yeah, again, I'll just say to the listeners, these things just happened to me. I didn't go out looking for this stuff. It just, I don't know, right place, right time, wrong place, wrong time. I don't know how you want to say it, but yeah, very strange. So yeah, anyway, moving on. We've gone from poltergeist, we call it, to a cryptid or animal encounter, to now we're going to move on to UFOs. Right, there's 2 UFO stories that I've got to tell you. And these stories were probably, especially the second story, the second sighting was probably the strangest thing that I've ever seen, right? So yeah, the first one. So I was living in East Ham at the time, still at home with Mum and Dad actually at the time, but I was working on the railway. I used to be an engineer on the railway. I used to fix, like, on the London Underground. I used to fix trains, basically. I was on rest days, and my dad had just retired at the time, and my mum was still at work. And it was a beautiful, beautiful summer's day. And where we lived, the types of houses we lived in are like terraced Victorian houses, if that makes sense. You can drop a pin most places in London, you'll see the sort of houses I'm talking about. So it was a lovely hot day. We had a very small back garden, probably about 20 foot, not much more than that. But me and my dad were sitting out the garden. We had a couple of loungers, and he was sitting at the back of the garden looking towards the house, and I was sitting more at the house end looking towards him. So the orientation of our road, which is sort of pertinent to both of these stories, is like if you come out of my front door and turn right, you're looking north, and if you turn left, you're looking south. Okay, so I'm sitting in the garden and I'm looking due east. So to the left of me is north, and to the right of me is south. I was sitting there with my dad, we're chatting away about rubbish, just enjoying the warmth and the sun, and I just happened to look up, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. And I looked up, and there, almost perpendicular, right above me, was a really, really bright white light. And I sort of looked up at it, and my dad I looked down at my dad, and he's sort of looking at me, and he went, "What are you looking at?" I went, "That light up there, look." And he sort of turned his head and looked, and he went, "That's a plane." And he carried on talking about whatever he was talking about. So I sort of went, "Oh yeah, it must be like," because again, I said in my email that where we lived, it's on a flight path coming into Heathrow pretty much. So the planes normally approach from the east of London and land in Heathrow, which is in West London, but they fly over the house all the time, And I just thought it was that, like, a plane, like my dad had said. And then I just happened to, about, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes later, maybe longer, I just happened to look up, and it was still there, and it hadn't moved. So I went, "That thing's still up there." My dad went, "It's a plane or something." He's like, my dad's proper old school, he don't believe in none of this sort of thing, That wasn't until what happened in the next story I'm going to tell you. So anyway, I'm an avid amateur astronomer. I love astronomy, anything to do with space. I love it. So I'd actually, not long before this happened, I'd actually bought myself a telescope. And so I said to my dad, "I'm going to go and get my telescope down." And he went, "Oh, don't be stupid. By the time you get up there," because it's a big telescope, it comes in about 3 large parts, like the tripod that he sits on, the mounting, and then the actual telescope itself. He said, "By the time you bring all that down the stairs, it will be gone, whatever it is." So anyway, me being me, I decided, no, I'm bringing the telescope down. So 3 trips up and down the stairs later, I've set the telescope up. And I've looked through the telescope, and then what I saw was like, I'm like, "Oh dear, I don't know what that is." And what I was looking at very, very high in the sky was a almost perfect diamond shape with 4 faceted sides, if you can sort of picture that. The best way to describe it, what it looked like, was again, I think I said in my email, is on some fishing trawlers and stuff, they have like radar targets, which are about 18 inches across, and they're like a diamond shape, like four sheets of metal welded together. It sort of looked a bit like that, is the only way I can describe it. So I've called my dad over. I've gone, look at that. So he's looked down the telescope, like the eyepiece of the telescope. He's gone, bloody hell, what's that? I've gone, I don't know. Like, so we're watching it, and as I'm watching it, I could tell it was stationary because it didn't move out of the field of view at all. So, like, if you look at the moon or if you look at stars with the rotation of the Earth, things move out of the field of view on a telescope pretty quickly, and you have to follow it with the top, depending on what type of mount you've got on your telescope. You have to follow it by adjusting the mount. You didn't have to do that with this; it just stayed completely still. So whatever it was not being affected by wind at high altitude or anything like that. It wasn't moving around. It wasn't travelling to Heathrow like a plane would. Anyway, as I'm looking at this thing through the eyepiece, an airliner actually flew across the field of view, leaving a vapour trail behind. And it flew in front of this thing. So this thing was much higher than the airliner. And this particular airliner wasn't on approach to Heathrow. He was much too high. He was like cruising altitude. So I couldn't really say how high it was, but it was high. It was probably several thousand feet higher than the jet airliner. Anyway, I observed this. Me and my dad both observed this thing for, I would say, a good 5 minutes through the telescope. It didn't move. It at all. It was just completely stationary, reflecting the sunlight. That's what the light was. It wasn't emitting a light. I'll just say that actually. It didn't have any blinking lights. It was just shining like silver in the sky from the reflected light from the sun. And then, as I was watching it, it was gone. It didn't accelerate away. It didn't fade. It was like someone turned off a light bulb, if that makes sense, and it was gone. And I never saw it again. It was very, very strange. So I have no idea what that was. That was a UAP, UFO, whatever you want to call it. But that was my first strange sighting in the sky, and I was very puzzled with that. Very, very puzzled. So I can't think of anything practically that it could have been. And I'll just add as well, even though it was much higher than the airliner, it was actually larger than the airliner, if you can imagine that. So you're looking with perspective, aren't you? So whatever's further away is going to be smaller, if an object of the same size. And this was bigger than the airliner. So it was, whatever it was, I would say, was pretty big, So that was quite strange.
Do you feel like that was, not that for sure, no, nobody would, but do you feel like that was something that could have been man-made, or did you get the off-planet vibes from that thing?
Got the off-planet vibes from that thing, even more so with the one I'm going to tell you in a minute. But I mean, because that really was odd. But
yeah.
No, it was, although it was sort of like, it didn't look, obviously you see people's sketches of UFOs and bits and pieces. The only thing I can think this would look like, I can't remember the name of the case in America, but it's a famous case where I think there was 2 ladies and a kid in a car, and this UFO, I think it was back in like the late 50s or 60s or something like that, and it was like a diamond-shaped craft that came down. There was flames coming out of it though, and then they got like radiation poisoning, I believe, or something like that. There was I think they left handprints on the dashboard where they were gripping the dashboard, where the heat was so intense, and then the thing was surrounded by several helicopters and it flew away. Do you know the case I'm talking about? I can't remember the name. Yeah. Well, if you look at the artist's impressions of that, that's similar to what I saw, but it was a perfect diamond. So it didn't look, not like the second object I'm going to tell you about, which looked very, very odd. But this thing was like, it looked like it could be man-made, if that makes sense, but it definitely wasn't. Not the way it behaved. I don't know of anything that we would have in our, either the Royal Air Force or the US Air Force or even the Russians or anything like that is diamond-shaped, but sits up on end like a diamond. It sits at massively high altitude. He's very large. It doesn't move at all for minutes on end. My initial thought, I'll be honest with you, was it was a radar target suspended off of a balloon. But then London is one of the most busiest sort of airspaces in the world, and you think, why would they be flying a balloon with a radar target on it at high altitude? But there was no balloon because I looked for it. So there was nothing attached to it. It was just there. But the strangest thing is when it blinked out of existence. I mean, it didn't move. It didn't suddenly fly away. It just blinked out of existence. And so, again, I would say, could it be man-made? I suppose it could be some experimental craft or something like that. But just the way it behaved, I would say no. I got definite sort of otherworldly vibes off of it.
Yeah, I don't always get super excited about UFO sightings because I'm a little jaded about UFOs. I think because I just feel like well over 90% is going to be stuff that's ours. They just don't tell us everything. But regardless, honestly, this is a very cool UFO sighting that you just shared, and it just does progress from here, right? So let's hear the next one.
Yeah, so the next one, it was same house, same garden, same year, I think. Again, this was late 1990, so we moved away from London in 2000. So it would have been either summer 98 or summer 99. I think it was 99. In fact, I'm 99.9% sure it was 99, if that makes sense. So it was this time. It was dark this time. So my mum had popped out to see one of her friends over the road, like one of our neighbours that she'd known for donkey's years, and I think they were sharing a gin and tonic over there. And I wasn't seeing my missus that night. I don't know why. I think she might have been working or something like that. And none of my mates were coming out, and my dad had popped round to our local pub, which is only about 100 yards away, and to see one of his mates. Now, I'll just say again for your listeners that my dad's not a big drinker at all. Right, neither am I really. He would go around to the pub, have a chinwag with his mates, like, you know what I mean, have a couple of pints and come home, and that was like the extent of his drinking. Really, he wouldn't come back like sloshed. You know what I mean. So I decided it was a beautiful summer's evening. It was one of those rare evenings in London where you don't get that horrible sort of sky glow from the street lights. It was perfectly clear, and you don't often get that. And so I decided the aforementioned telescope was going to come out, and I'm going to do a bit of, sky watching. And so I can still remember what I was looking at as well, because I set the telescope up, and right over the roof of our local pub was the constellation of Orion was rising, and there's an object in the sword of Orion called M42, or the Orion Nebula, and I thought, I bet that looked spectacular tonight, and it did. It was beautiful, like this nebulous green glow, this huge gas cloud, So I'm looking at that and stuff, and so it must have been about 11ish, something like that, 12ish. Last orders had gone on to the pub because my dad had come home, and he come out the garden. My mum was still over at her friend's, and he strolled down to the garden, and we had a couple of bottles of beer in the fridge, so we cracked a couple of cold beers open, and I'm leaning on the fence. We're both looking up, having the usual sort of like, God, isn't it vast? The vast reaches of space. Imagine what's out there, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly my dad went, you have to excuse my French here, but my dad went, what the fuck is that, right? And I glanced at what he was looking at, and I didn't, again, my brain didn't really process what I was looking at. I went, oh, it's a heron. Because that park that I was talking about, right, in the cryptid story, herons nest over there, so it's not impossible to see them where we lived. Occasionally they would fly over, and they'd fly over at night. I'd seen them fly over at night, and they would get that off of their pale grey underbelly. They would get that horrible glow off the street lamps, and they would glow. So this thing I'm looking at, I thought it was a heron flying over, and it was the street lamps reflecting off it. And my dad went, no, look. And then I sort of looked back, and my eyes focused on it, and my brain sort of processed what I was looking at. And what I was looking at was, I think in my email I referred to it as like a stylized manta ray, right? Well, that's sort of what it was like. And years later, because we didn't have the internet back then, this is really quite, my stomach flipped over when I saw this photograph. So we didn't have the internet back then. So years later, I was browsing the internet, and I just happened to type in something like UFOs or something, and there's a picture. Kenneth Arnold, the original person that coined the phrase flying saucer, who had the encounter, I think it was near Mount Rainier, I believe. There's a photo of him holding a photograph, and what he's showing on that photo, it's an artist rendering, but what he's showing is almost exactly what I saw, right? So it was like a crescent shape, and it was flying points forward, if that makes sense. Imagine like the crescent moon, and right at the thickest part of the crescent, right in the middle of it, was a black disc. And this thing was glowing with, it was like a terracotta colour. But so it wasn't like, you see like classic UFOs with bright shining lights and flashing lights around the rim of it. It wasn't like that at all. It was glowing from the inside, if that makes sense, but not really bright. It was just illuminated from the inside. Anyway, we watched this thing fly from south to north, and it was really high. Whatever this was really, really high. I would say on the edge of space. And because you could see it following the curvature of the Earth. And then as it sort of disappeared over the horizon. So I suppose as we were looking at it, the size of it in the sky was roughly, if you held like, the big old American silver dollars,
Mm-hmm.
if you held one of them at arm's length above your head, it was probably about that size. So a fair size, And I remember it sort of, we both watched it in silence. And then it disappeared around sort of over the curvature of the Earth heading north. And I remember me and my dad just looked at each other. And my dad went, "My God, I've never seen anything like that," Well, that was that, really. And then my mum come home, and me and my dad were like, "Oh, you never guess what we just seen," and we were telling all about it. I was, like I said earlier, I was working on a railway at this time. And the very next shift that I was on was, we used to do lates, earlys and nights. It was a late shift, and I loved it because it was free. It was 3 p.m. till 10 p.m. And it was on the other side of London, in West London, near Wembley. And it was great because I used to get home in time to be able to get around the off licence and grab a few beers, So I finished work. It was exactly 1 week later, and me and my mate finished the shift. We were car sharing. We've driven round the North Circular, which is the A406 road that goes around like through North London back down to East London. And he's dropping me off at home. And as we pulled up outside my house, my mum came. She must have seen the headlights in the car because we had the houses were all terraced, but our house had like an alley down the side, and you could see car headlights. She must have seen the headlights and realised it was roughly my time to come. She's come running out to the front of the house, and like she was like, "Quick, come quick, come and look at that thing." And I'm like, I looked at my mate Gary. Like we both started laughing, because my mum can be quite excitable. And I've said, "See you later, Gary." He's driven off. I've sort of jogged through the house. I'm thinking, what's going on here? I've walked out the back garden, and my mum's in the garden waving her arms about like a nutcase. And I'm like, "What's the matter?" She went, that thing. And I was like, "What thing?" She's like, "That thing you and your dad saw." I went, "Yeah." She went, "It's just flown over the houses." I went, "Oh, of course it has." I thought she's winding me up, But then I could see that she was so sort of shaken by what she'd seen. Anyway, I sort of sat her down to like calm her down a little bit. I said, "No, come on, seriously, what did you see?" She said, "That thing you and your dad saw." She said, "It's literally just thrown across the roofs of the houses." She said, "It was immense." I said, "How big?" She described it between 1 and 3 football, like soccer fields in width, right? So huge, right? But she said this time it had flown from north to south, really low, silent, right over the roof of the pub, right? Now, we were driving up the road as this, sorry, I'm sitting on a creaky chair. I hope it's not too loud. We were driving up the Barking Road at the time, and if correct, we should have seen it. It should have literally flown over the top of our car at that height and that size. But we never saw a thing. Once she calmed down, I got her to draw it, and it was exactly the same shape, colour, everything that me and my dad had seen, exactly almost to the hour the week before, 7 days exactly before. So can't explain that one either, but that was really odd. And the fact that, like I said, my mum saw it on a separate day, I saw it with my dad, again, just serves to validate in my mind that we saw something very, very odd,
Was it, I mean, I'm assuming since this was again nighttime and she was able to describe the exact same color, then when she saw it, it was in fact glowing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it radiated a soft terracotta glow. Is the only way the best way I can describe it. The best way. So, yeah, it was a very, very strange looking thing. But like I said, if you want a good comparison of what it looked like, Google Kenneth Arnold, and you'll see him holding a black and white image, and it was almost identical to that. But it wasn't flying like, I assume the picture that he's holding, it sort of looks like it's flying with the curve of the crescent forward. This wasn't. This was flying with the points forward, almost like going backwards, if that makes sense.
I mean, it is strange, even though it was silent, being that large in width.
It was huge.
For you guys not to see it is just as strange as the sighting itself.
Well, I think that another thing that I did after that was we had a local newspaper called the Newham Recorder, which is still going, and I thought other people must have seen it. There'll be a story in a newspaper, even a national newspaper. Nothing, absolutely nothing. No, so almost like we were the only ones to see it, But again, you have to ask yourself the question: how many people walk around looking up at the sky? My mum just happened to see it because she was a little bit of the story I missed there. My mum was actually laying back on the lounge herself, looking up at the sky when it came across. So if she'd have been, I don't know, standing there talking to the neighbour across the fence, she probably wouldn't have seen it, even though it was really low and really big, because it was the way she described it. It didn't come directly overhead. It was probably a few hundred meters away, to the east, if that makes sense. So you're seeing it at sort of like a 45-degree angle. Does that make sense?
Of course, I guess if depending on where you guys were and the roofs of the houses and everything, maybe you just weren't at the proper angle to even see it if it was in fact that low, right?
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, it was really odd. And again, just the fact that I saw it with my mum and dad was like, really quite validating, really. You don't think you're going mad. I'll tell you what was interesting though. My mum and dad are both still alive, but they're separated now. Again, because I was coming on here, I wanted to get my sort of like descriptions and facts correct and everything. And my dad, he had a stroke in 2017, and it's left him. He's fine. He's absolutely fine. He's not disabled or anything like that. But it's left him. His memories are not as sharp as they really were. And me and my mum had this conversation about this object, and we both remember it being exactly the same. In fact, just being silly, I drew it on a piece of paper. She drew it on a piece of paper. We were on FaceTime and we held it up to each other, and it was a complete match. But I spoke to my dad because it was his birthday just at the start of July, and I said to him, I might be going on this podcast, and describing this event. And he went, "Oh, I remember that. Oh God, that was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "How do you remember it, Dad?" And he went, "Like a triangle." And he remembers it as a triangle now. But I said to him, "No, it was a crescent shape." And he was like, "No, I don't remember it being that shape. I remember it being a triangle." But so there's, I don't know if that's his memory playing up because of the stroke, or whether he actually saw something now different to me. But at the time when it happened, I can distinctly remember him saying it was crescent shaped, if you know what I mean. So
I wonder if maybe he's pulling from the memory of the first experience during the day. I mean, I know a diamond is not exactly a triangle, but it's kind of triangle shaped in a way. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd not thought of that before, Shannon. I think that's probably a fair theory, because his memory is not anywhere near what it used to be now, and because of the stroke,
Yeah.
But
I'm sorry.
It's strange because no, he's fine, honestly. But what is strange about it, because my dad was like proper old school, so he was quite strict and everything, and not in a bad way, and corporal punishment was a thing in them days, so I used to get quite smacked and stuff, you know what I mean? Like kids did back in them days, in the early 70s. It was like, it was the dumb thing, But it's funny there because he's after the stroke, he's become very sort of emotional and much more sort of, I don't know what the word is he's looking for, not affectionate really. I don't see him very often, he lives back in England and he's remarried and everything. But yeah, he's much more emotional than he used to be. He used to be much more matter of fact. But now he's almost changed his personality a little bit, if that makes sense. But anyway, that's going off subject. But
no. And what about your mom? I mean, it sounds like she's really into this stuff, which is amazing. I love that. But did this experience, did it delight her? Like give her a confirmation of, oh yeah, there are some weird things out there, or did it scare her?
I think it shocked her. Yeah, I think it shocked her. I think I think, obviously being her son, and I told her these other stories before, what happened to me, particularly the Wanstead Park one. And I think, obviously mums always sort of believe their sons, don't they, and all the rest of it. But I think this was, I think this was a moment of sort of validation again, if I want to use that word again, for her, that oh my God, I've just seen something I cannot explain. You know, I think the overriding emotion I got from my mum that night was pure shock, to be honest with you. And she couldn't stop talking about it. She was talking about it constantly after that, you know, for days. You know, I cannot believe what I saw. I can't believe it. Of course, she's told several of our neighbours, and you can imagine the reaction. Oh yeah, well, how many gin and tonics did you have that evening, Jean? You know, what's the it?
Right.
So
the usual, blame it on the alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't believe she had that particular night, you know. But yeah, it was again. I think out of all the stories I've told you tonight, obviously the Wanstead Part one was the scariest, but that one that I've just talked about was probably the strangest, out and out strangest one that I saw, because it was just a very strange looking craft, if I can call it that. It almost looked organic, if that makes sense. And there was a part of me actually, because you hear about these. Some of the astronauts have described, haven't they, seeing sort of like biological entities in space, you know, in low Earth orbit, and that. I almost wondered if it could have been something like that. You know, I can't explain it. It's just very, very strange.
I mean, especially with that jet black disc situated in the middle. It seemed like such a different part, whatever that part would be, obviously for functionality purposes of this thing. But okay, so same question in closing for this one is, do you feel like this was on Earth, coming from Earth, and we made this, or this was an off-planet thing again?
Yeah, I'd say the first UFO, the diamond shape, that in theory, I suppose, could have been man-made. It looked, if you were going to compare the two craft, if you want to call them that, you'd say that looked manufactured. I personally don't think it was manufactured here, down here on Earth. I think it was something extraterrestrial, but you could see it was a proper nuts and bolts craft, if that makes sense. The second one, the manta ray, if you want to call it that almost, like I said, it almost looked organic. It didn't look like anything I've ever seen in a book or in you know, even in, like, if you type in different types of UFOs on Google, so I've never seen anything like that. Nothing. So I have no idea what that was. I know I would say with almost 100% certainty that was definitely extraterrestrial, in my opinion, my humble opinion.
Well, that reminds me of the movie The Abyss. Have you watched that one?
Yes.
Yeah, how they have the, you know, essentially the underwater, you know, unidentified submerged objects, USOs. They wouldn't be UFOs. And then those were essentially craft underwater, but then they were also biological at the same time. So that's where my mind kind of went when you said that.
Yeah. I couldn't disagree. If I'm honest, I couldn't disagree. It really did look organic, this thing. Like a big terracotta manta ray sort of shape, you know. Excuse me, more slender than a manta ray. Not, you know, if you looked at a manta ray and then that, you don't look anything like each other. But I'm just trying to give the listeners a sort of an idea of its sort of form, if that makes sense. So the best thing to do is just Google Kenneth Arnold, and you'll see him holding the picture, and you'll see that very, very similar. Very, very similar.
It's just so cool to think about something that massive being able to fly completely silently too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and no sort of you'd think you'd at least get some kind of like disturbance of the air, something that massive moving through the air, that sort of thing. Because she said it wasn't hanging around. She said it travelled across, you know, within a few seconds. You know, from when she saw it, almost, let's say, directly in front of her, to disappearing over the houses, or whatever you want to say. You know, she said it was only a matter of seconds. It wasn't. You think, you know, if a craft that, or object, should we call it, that big, the disturbance that it must make through the atmosphere, you'd probably you feel it probably, you know, at that distance, you know. But no, nothing. It just toddled on by as if you know, not caring the world. But,
not that this is really a thing, and I mean, at least not from what's coming to my mind. But I don't sit and look at UFO literature as much as I do other subjects. But and again, I was starting to say that I don't think this is really a thing, but it could be. That's where I was going with that. But do you remember getting out of the car and dogs barking or anything strange? Like, was there any reaction from the non-human entities around on Earth in response to this low craft?
No, nothing. So I couldn't explain it really. There was no dogs barking. No, I mean obviously we're in East London, like, and there are plenty of dogs in backyards, and you do hear them. But yeah, that was just completely normal evening. No, nothing strange at all, apart from my mum's completely
yeah. The flailing arms. I can see that because it just imparts how genuinely, just like you said, shocked. There's no other word for that. Shocked she was, and like, hey, come in.
Yeah.
Or did you not see that? Please. Like, I would feel the same way. And see, now she feels like so many other people that, I mean, even though your dad and you had seen that previously, you saw it together. So that was nice. But now she has the experience of seeing that, low and probably, I mean, slow for it. I would hazard to say it could probably go a lot faster than what she saw it. But now she has to go through this whole thing that a lot of witnesses do, that I was the only one to see it. And then she'll bring it up to someone and they go, well, how many gin and tonics did you have? And you're like, gosh darn it.
Exactly,
no, no, not enough to see this. This was actually there. And I mean, that's why she's running out with her arms flailing, like, please tell me I'm not the only one who just saw that.
The other thing that we only just touched on about this particular sighting was the timing of it as well. That was a real thing that struck me about it, is that me and my dad saw it on the Friday night on one week at about, between 11 and 12 o'clock, whenever last orders used to be. I can't remember now. Probably about midnight, I think. And then my mum saw it exactly 1 week later, Friday night, at about 11 o'clock, 11:30.
Right.
And it's like, that can't have been random, surely. It's exactly almost to the hour. Well, within 30 minutes, probably. It's just weird. Just really weird.
Yes, that is a very strange aspect of that. So then the next Friday, were you guys kind of like, I imagine you just being goosenecked out back, right? Like looking.
And I've never ever saw it again. Never seen anything like it again. And I do a lot of sort of sky gazing, especially here where I'm in Ireland. There's like a dark sky reserve. So when it's not like pouring down with rain and cloudy like it is today, which is quite rare here in the west of Ireland, I'm always looking up at the sky, and I've never seen like anything again like those two experiences, particularly the second one. It's just, and it's not for lack of trying. I'd love to see it again. I would love to see something like that again, but it's not happened. And for them, and they were within weeks of each other, those two sightings as well. So whether there was some kind of flap, or if you want to call it that, I suppose, going on over London at that time. Who knows?
Did you ever, even years later, run across anybody from, it doesn't even have to be very close to where you were, anyone in that area at all, or even on the continent, that around that time reported something like that?
No.
Yeah.
Not at all. It was just, like I say, we were just very privileged, the three of us, to see it, really,
Right.
I think. And I can't explain why. You'd think something that big, moving that speed over in the sky over East London, hundreds of people, if not thousands, would have seen it. You would think,
Right.
But as far as I am aware, we were the only ones. And which will sort of probably opens you up for a bit of ridicule, really. But I can assure you, I'm not fabricating these stories. These are genuine things that happened to me, my friends, my parents, and that I genuinely can't explain.
Those are some proper UFO sightings, Ian. Can I just say, like, those are so interesting to me.
Oh, that's my pleasure. It's, some people might also ask, why haven't you talked about this before? And it has crossed my mind in the past, because there's an organisation in the UK. I think you have MUFON in the US, and we have BUFORA, I think it's called, the British UFO Research Association, I think it's called. And I really I really sort of struggled with, should I tell someone about it or shouldn't I, for years. And I'm saying daft because it's only a sighting, a sighting if you want to, not to sort of like minimise it. But same with that monstered part creature thing, whatever it was, ape, whatever it was. For some reason, it just feels right to talk about it now, but it didn't before now, and I don't know why. So that's something I've been sort of pondering. Why now do I feel the need to talk about this? Maybe it's just the right time for me. I don't know.
Well, I'm glad that you did, and I'm sure the listeners are very glad that you did because just and going back, it's a very perfect and simple analogy for, when I asked you, well, did you come across any reports? Well, it takes a person being willing to go through that to make a report to say, yes, I saw a manta ray shape with a jet black disc in the middle, blah, blah, blah. But look what your mom went through. She brought it up to someone and they're telling her she's just drunk. So it's a bummer that it's still like that to this day. And then I do think we get to a point where like, F it. I want to get this stuff out there.
Yeah. Because I mean, you sit down in a pub with a couple of your workmates. You go, yeah, I'll tell you about this time I went to this park night fishing with my mates, and we got chased by some unknown creature. They just look at you and go, yeah, all right, of course you did. You know what I mean? It's like they think you're mad, and it's like you're saying about my mum. It becomes so frustrating that you think, I know what I saw, I know what I experienced. Whether you believe me or not, I suppose is immaterial, but I don't like the thought of people thinking I'm a liar. I really don't. That really doesn't sit right with me. And I'm telling people these things because I think they have a right to know about it. It's my experience, but I feel I need to share it because there are things out there, in my opinion, that are just strange. Just we live in a universe which is incredible, and I'm messing this up. I'm trying to explain myself, but I can't really. But people need to know these things, that we're not alone. I truly believe we're not alone. I believe there are out of place animals, if you want to call it that. If it's an ape, it's not native to Britain, but it's there. It could be a cryptid. I don't know whether that ghost story right at the start. What was that? I mean, I know I experienced it. I can't explain it though. So I almost feel like it's a little bit of my duty to tell these stories and let other people sort of not judge my experiences, but like sort of just contemplate them maybe and think about it and think, maybe you did encounter something really strange, and keep an open mind, I would say, probably is the easiest way to say it. That's what I would urge people, just keep an open mind because you never know.
Well, and it is a bummer because I think most of us, not all of us, but most of us that have had these experiences have dipped our toes into telling an outside party about one or all of them. And we get that look or we get that tone or we get the, okay, dude, let's just talk about football. And of course, I'm talking about soccer I'm trying to be, I'm in the England state of mind right now, the British state of mind, but okay, man, let's just get back on football. Sure. You saw a UFO look like a manta. Okay, dude. Yeah. So you learn really quickly, and that stings. And you learn quickly, okay, just going to tuck that weird right back in because you get nothing out of it. It makes you feel, like you said, as if you're trying to make something up or get attention, and that's not at all what it's about. You're really trying to share something that was in some cases can be life changing and reality shifting.
It was for me. It was particularly that second sighting. It was like like we spoke about again. I don't want to keep going back to the Wanstead Park one, but I mean that sort of thing you can rationalise,
right?
And even the first UFO sighting, you can say, yeah, it was definitely a nuts and bolts craft or object, whether it was man-made or alien. Well, I've told you what I think, but I'm not ruling out it couldn't be something experimental, manufactured here on Earth. But then you have these other experiences that you think there's no way I can explain that. I'm having a hard time processing in my head what I've just seen. It's that odd, and these are the things that really, particularly that second UFO story, is the one that really sort of tipped me over the edge. If into this sort of I don't know, paranormal realm, if you know what I mean, of striking up a real interest in it and wanting to listen to other people's stories and you know, and I'm sure, you know, not trying to sort of discredit other people's stories. I'm sure there are a lot of fabrications and, you know, like made up scenario, you know, stories and stuff that can be really readily explained away. But there's always that core of things that can't, like that second UFO sighting. That I just cannot explain that. I just can't. You know, if you'd have seen it, you'd understand what I mean. You know, so yeah, it can be quite a lonely place trying to talk about these things.
It is. It is. I know that firsthand. And I do know that if I saw anything close to what you just described, especially I would say with the strange manta ray with the jet black disc, if anyone has seen anything like that, by the way, please reach out to me and I will let Ian know. But I know that if I saw something like that, I would probably then start looking more at, you know, into the UFO subject than I do now. So, you know, I just figure there's so many folks doing some wonderful work out there in the UFO community. Then I just kind of, because it's not my first passion, but when I hear incredible stories like what you just shared, including the diamond story, I mean, whether or not that was completely made here, came from a human brain, and that's incredible, right? That's amazing that we can do that, and I think that we can, by the way. Or if it, you know, it someday it back in whatever year it crashed, it was an alien craft, we back engineered that, and then we made it. I mean, there's all kinds of theories for these things, right? Or if it's just straight up alien and they happen to use the same Home Depot bolts that we do. I don't know, but either way, three, in essence, very incredible experiences with UFOs. And those are the kinds that I really do love to hear. And I know that my mind would be changed very greatly if I saw something like that, especially your description of it just seeming more biological. That is so cool to me.
No, definitely cool. But like I said, he sort of leaves you with such a weird feeling when you say something like that. It's just, you know, like I said, you're trying to sort of make sense of it, or what you've just seen, you know. And at the same time, you're thinking, have I just seen something not of this planet, you know? And then, of course, you start asking yourself the huge questions, you know, are we? If that's true, then we're definitely not alone in the universe, and I've just seen proof of that, you know. And that, I mean, what a massively sort of earth moving revelation, you know. It's it's really weird.
Well, and then my brain goes to, especially since that one, and you admit in the first sighting, the diamond seemed more nuts and bolts. In the second one, more biological. So, you know, it kind of kicks you more towards something off-planet, alien. My mind goes to, okay, then, and this is so speculatory, it's ridiculous, but, you know, my mind goes to who's piloting it, what's inside of that thing, why is it so big, why does it need to be so big? That's my thing. I'm like, what the hell is in that craft? Why is it so large?
Yeah, is it like an aircraft carrier type thing? It's got smaller stuff inside it or whatever, you know. But I know it's it was definitely a strange one. But there was one more little story I was going to tell you. I put in the email, alluded to it, and it's something that I experienced with my wife, right, which is really, really weird. And that was after we just moved here. I was just going to, if you don't mind, I'd like to tell you about it.
Absolutely.
Basically, we'd only just moved here to Ireland. We moved from Sweden over here to Ireland. I got a job over here. I'm now I've already said I worked on the London Underground, and without giving you all the boring story of it, I ended up in quality management. I'm a quality manager. So I ended up working for an employer down here in West Cork. When we first moved here, we rented a house that didn't have any internet, and at that point, this was only in 2019. At that point, we only had like the really old-fashioned button phones. Me and my missus, we couldn't get internet in the house, so they said, "Oh no, get a smartphone. You can create a hotspot type thing, and you'll be able to get internet." And all. So that's what we did. We both bought these smartphones, but we had to go to a town called Skibbereen, which is just up the road here, about 30 kilometres from where we are now. There's a Vodafone shop there, and we popped into the mobile phone shop. So we popped into the mobile phone shop to get some literature on what's the best tariffs and all the rest of it. Anyway, we were parked in a high street. It's a busy little high street. It was a lovely summer's day, and we climbed back into the car. And of course, obviously over here, you've got to remember we're right end. They drive on the same side here as in the UK. So the cars are right-hand drive, not left-hand drive. So I'm sitting behind the steering wheel, and Sylvia's sitting in the passenger seat. So she's on the pavement side, okay? We're looking at these leaflets and stuff, and we both just happened to glance up, and coming along the pavement was a very odd little character. So probably about 5'2", purple crew cut hair, right? I couldn't tell you if it was male or female, right? Like purple crew cut, a leather biker jacket, and a kilt, right? So obviously quite a distinctive character. And they were carrying a bag of shopping in each hand, yeah. And me and my missus, we looked at this person and we both went, "Oh, they're a bit odd," type thing, you know, sort of like. And then we didn't think anything of it, and we both looked down at the leaflets, and then we both happened to look up again at the same time. And this person, I'd seen them walk past the car because they were so odd looking. I was looking in the wing mirror as they walked past, and we looked back up, and they was back in front of our car again, about 20, 30 yards, walking towards us again, almost like a record had jumped. And like my missus is very sort of no nonsense. She's from Manchester area, so people from that area, they're quite known for being like no nonsense, you know, tough northerners type thing, you know. And my missus went, "Did you just say that?" And I'm sort of staring, and she went, "Yeah." I said, "I did. Yeah. They were walked past us. How have they got back there?" You know, because it was literally a couple of seconds. You know, yeah, it was like, I don't know if you call it a time slip or a glitch in the matrix or something, but it was really odd. And again, my missus, like I say, very no nonsense, but she was really shaken up by it, and I think it's fair to say. And she talked about it to, you know, again, a bit like my mum with that second sighting. She talked about it non-stop afterwards for a few days. That was really weird. That was really weird, you know. So that was the last thing, the last weird thing happened to us. But yeah, it was odd. It was very odd.
I mean, for someone that looked that different, because I mean that obviously would have been a striking person for anyone to see. Like, oh, the purple hair and this very loud outfit, a kilt and a leather jacket. I can see that.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be very striking in your mind. Like, oh, look at that interesting person, like with the balls to choose to wear such an outfit. And then a couple seconds you look down, you look back up, and they're just doing the exact same walk. Yeah. That is creepy.
Yeah, it was. It was like, you know, like the old vinyl records when they used to jump.
Yeah,
it was like that. It was like that, but reality jumped. It was, and there's no way that they could have, because they were walking really slowly as well. That was the other thing, because they had these, you know, like the old Doc Martin boots. They had like these. They weren't Doc Martens. They were like these great big sort of hobnail boots, like they were wearing these big black boots. And yeah, very odd looking character. And they weren't walking fast. They was just like sort of like plodding along with these bags of shopping. And I said, I watched this person in the wing mirror walk past me because they looked so odd. I looked back down at the literature that we got from the shop, and we both looked up simultaneously. Something just made the pair of us look up again. Maybe it was the movement of the person or whatever, and they were back in front of our car again. And it was really, it was creepy. It was a really strange thing.
I mean, you know, and for them, if they had run back the way they came to walk this same pathway again, that would have been extremely noticeable. You would have seen that.
Yeah, I mean, pavement there's about 2 foot wide.
Yeah.
So it's not like a great big pavement or sidewalk, as you guys would call it. It's not like a great big way. It's a really old market town, and literally, you know, I could have, if I'd have been sitting on the passenger side, I could have literally put my arm out and stopped the person walking past. You know, I'll be touching the shop front. It's so, you know, length of my arm is the width of the pavement, you know, a couple of foot. So very, very odd. There's no alleyways there for them to duck back down. And in any case, they'd have had to have been like a Usain Bolt levels of speed, you know, to do that.
Well, so, and they're in these big old boots and they're carrying bags. So it just would have been this whole big show. You know, I can imagine somebody trying to run with bags, and it'd be a clumsy thing. So did this person, if it was a person, who knows? But did this person look up at you guys in either one of the walks as they were walking towards you?
No, it was just eyes down. If you know what I mean, looking at the pavement. They looked quite elderly as well. That was another. They had a very lined face. So I have to be honest. You get quite a lot of inverted commas characters down here in West Cork. There's quite a lot of like sort of new age types and stuff like that. So that this person, whoever it was, would sort of blend right in with that, if that makes sense. But they were quite, I would say they were quite elderly, but dressed very outlandishly with a purple crew cut. I mean, how often do you see that? You know, especially, you know, in a little town like that. You know, it's it was very, very odd. So again, but there was validation because I didn't see it. I wasn't on my own when I saw it. Sylvia saw it, and she was shocked. She was like, "What the hell did you see that?" I was like, "Yeah, that person already walked past us." I was like, "Yeah, I know. That's really weird."
So after the second walk, now it's really apparent something very strange is going on. I'm sure that you guys watched this person. Did they then, in fact, keep walking and finish where they were going the first time, I assume?
Yeah. They just kept walking, and I kept watching them in the wing mirror of the car on the passenger side. Like I was looking in the wing mirror, and I watched them disappear up the street. And then we're both sitting there looking at each other, me and the missus, going, "What just happened?" That was just really odd. You know, it was, like I said, it happened almost as quick as a jump record. It was like, it was really, really odd.
That
really,
is
really
a
odd.
weird one. I mean, I know that Liverpool has got a lot of time slip stories and things like that.
Was it? I didn't know that.
Yeah. I want to, maybe you've heard this episode. If not, I forget what number it is, but I can send it to you. But Vance Nesbitt of the Sasquatch Experience, he does that show now with Sean Forker and James Baker and them. He came on and he told a very similar story about when he was out working. I think he was driving. This is a long while ago. I'm not going to try to remember exact details, but the gist was he saw a bus driver, and this person had like various distinctive features, hair and whatever the features were. I'm not going to try to just say something out of turn here. But then he kept, driving down the road, and then it was as if the very same bus or the very same exact bus driver just drove by him again. And it just stood out so much to him that, it's one of those things where when talking about strange things, that keeps coming up because he describes it the same way. He's like, "What was that? Like, did it happen to be a twin of the exact same person that has the exact same job, driving this damn bus, or as you say, did the record just skip?"
Yeah, that's what it felt like to me. It felt like, yeah, I don't know, time slipped, but nothing else seemed to change because there was cars. That was the other odd thing as well. Actually, now I'm thinking about it. The cars were still moving on the street. None of the cars jumped. It was just that person.
That is so weird.
Again, that even makes it that's giving me goosebumps thinking about that. Yeah, nothing else because it's busy high street. There was no one else on that side of the pavement. There was people on the other side of the road, but it was just this one person walking towards us, and then boom, they were back again where we'd first noticed them in literally a second.
It really is really quite creepy though when you think about that, because then you go, well, was that person not really even there the first time? Was that just as we said in the beginning before we started, when we were just talking, like just catching a glimpse into something? Oh, you caught it too early. It's just there's so many things that your brain just tries to grasp at, but I mean, we'll never know. But so with your wife being quite no nonsense, what does she say about this? And did that kind of soften her to maybe, other ideas of the paranormal or strange things?
I mean, she is obviously, we've been together for donkey's years, so she's obviously heard me talk about these things before, and she knows me, she believes me. She's not. When I say she's no nonsense, she doesn't suffer fools gladly, shall we say? So she knows me back to front. So when I'm being sincere about something, she'll. You had that trusting relationship and all the rest of it, and she knows when I'm mucking about or winding her up. And these stories that I've told you tonight, she knows about, and she was always sort of like, she always supported me in it, I suppose you would say, and goes, "Yeah, really," like, she never laughed at me or anything like that. And then for her to experience something strange again with me, I suppose, I don't know if I'm a magnet for this sort of rubbish, but for her to experience that with me, I think it was interesting to see her emotions. She was very shocked to begin with, but I think, again, I've used this word a lot tonight, but there was some form of validation in it for her, that she actually saw with me, and I saw it too. She's not going mad. She said, because if you saw that on your own, you'd either discount it or you think I'm going mad. But when your partner sees it with you, someone you trust implicitly, like, I think to use that word, it sort of validates what you've seen, and reinforces what you've seen. Yeah, so I think she was, well, again, shocked, shocked, and then, yeah, I think probably fair to say it's made her sort of more receptive to this sort of these sort of things like that you feature on your podcast, and we watch occasionally on YouTube and stuff, and it's it's quite an interesting change, really, in a sort of demeanour towards these things, I suppose you could say.
And just to remind everyone that the story that he just shared was from 2019, so very recent, really. When we're talking about a lot of times, stories can be decades old, like mine. Is Cork? How populated is Cork? How many people live there? Do you know?
It's fair. It's very rural. Put it that way. There's a fair amount of people. It's not like. It's not like sort of going out in the middle of the, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an American sort of analogy now. It's probably like sort of, I'm going to pronounce it wrong now, like Appalachia. It's probably that sort of volume of people down here. It's like a lot of farms, a lot of little towns and villages. Like I say, this time of the year, there's a lot of people here, but in the winter, it's dead as a doornail.
Right.
And, the only people on the roads are the local farmers, or little old ladies going to mass in a local church and stuff like that. You don't get a lot of, the odd delivery van driving around. But the roads are deserted back in the winter.
Yeah, okay. So that's where I was kind of wondering, because I was thinking, well, if that was a local, would you think that you would ever, run into them again? I mean, here in Vegas, I see people every day I'll never see again in my entire life, and I live here.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at.
Yeah, so right, exactly. I mean, if that was a tourist, which, hey, maybe it's a real big tourist from way somewhere else, but I was just kind of getting at, if that person in this very unique getup lived there, would you hazard to say that you probably by now maybe would have seen them out and about again?
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair assessment. Yeah, I would say so. And I've never seen this person ever again. So yeah, I see where you're going with that. But no, I've never seen him before or since. And yeah, with the population density you've got down here, you probably would expect to see someone that distinctive over the last, say, 4 years again. I'd say that's a fair assessment, but I have never seen them again.
What a cool experience, though. I mean, and those are the ones that you can't quite classify, and I love those. The glitches are very, they're always so unique. And well, gosh, Ian, thank you so much for being willing to come on and share.
Nice.
I love your encounters, that's for sure. So out of all of these, I already know that what we're assuming is most likely, we don't know for sure, but most likely the chimp in the park. You don't want to experience that again. But out of all of these, do you lean towards then the Monterey being the one that you would like to experience again?
Without a shadow of a doubt. The time, the poltergeist thing, or whatever you want to call it, the presence in the dark room, that was just plain odd. It was frightening at the time. It does give me the odd goosebumps if I think about it, and really put myself back in there. But it wasn't what I call like terrifying, The Wanstead Park one was terrifying, I tell you now. That was I've never been so scared in all my life, yeah. Then we had the diamond-shaped UFO, which was just very odd and very curious. The manta ray, if you want to call it that, that was the one that really opened Pandora's box for me. And then the time slip one, I would sum that up as disconcerting, if that's a fair assessment to make, I think. It was very disconcerting, is the best way I would describe it. But the crescent-shaped manta ray type thing, that was the one that really, really tipped me over the edge into this, like, what the hell was that? It was so profound, the sighting. I think it's probably the best way to sum it up.
The time slipping punk rocker. I love that.
Yeah, I suppose you could call him that. But yeah, I'd say that that was more disconcerting.
Yeah.
That was more disconcerting for me personally. You know,
But,
it was like,
but Ian,
what just happened now?
you did, and not that this is neither here nor there, but I just wanted to ask again. But you said neither one of you could discern gender, really.
No, they were pretty sort of gender neutral, should we say?
Right.
It could have been an older woman. It could have been a little sort of weedy old fella, like, you know. I can't. It was a very strange person. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
strange. There was no sort of like, you know, the figure wasn't either like a woman's or a man's, and you could see their bare legs out between the bottom of the kilt and the top of these big hobnail boots that was halfway up their shins, and you know, they were like proper skinny, knobbly legs that could have belonged to a man or a woman, I suppose.
Right.
It's a really odd-looking character.
Mm.
The face was extremely lined, and you know when someone's got like if they take their false teeth out and their chin and nose goes quite close together, they were like that, if that makes sense. Yeah. Very, very strange looking person.
Wouldn't that be incredible to see that person again and just go, oh my God, are they going to do it again? Are they going to skip again?
Yeah. Who? I mean, I you know, again, I can't explain it. We can speculate all night on here, I suppose, but I honestly can't explain it. You know, and just odd-looking person, very odd thing that happened. You know, and the thing for me, I think that I always sort of hold on to with all the stories that I've told you tonight, is that other people experienced this with me. I wasn't on my own for any of these, you know. And like I said in my email, if you ever want to talk to any of these people, I can arrange it. It's not a problem, you know. If there's the only one you can't, obviously, is the very first story, Bernard, because I've lost complete touch with him. But you know, if you wanted to talk to my mum, for example, you know, about this sighting, you know, it can be arranged, and she can tell you her side of it. You know, it's for me, that's probably the strongest thing that you know that runs through all these stories, that I experienced them with other people. It wasn't just me out the garden in the night time seeing some lights in the sky and then going, oh, I saw a UFO, and everyone going, yeah, right. You know, I witnessed them with people that I trust with my life, you know, my mum and dad and my partner and my best mates, you know. And so that, I think, maybe gives a more credence to them. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel it does.
It certainly does, and it makes you feel less like you can go, well, maybe I'm going nuts, you know, because not that you actually. I think that, not that I thought that when I saw what I saw. I know what I saw. You know, it's one of those things where you're going, I know what I saw. But it is nice to have someone else there with you to experience that. And I would hazard to say that it would be pretty awesome to talk to your mom, because she did see that craft so low and so close, and it obviously stuck with her. And I think that one day that would be really lovely to speak to your mum.
No problem. She'll be over the moon.
No pressure. I don't want to make anybody feel like, I don't know. If she wanted to, I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah. I've got your email, so I'll get her to email you or something.
Awesome.
You know, at least, and then you can sort it out between you. She's over in England, obviously. So but she's pretty good with the old technology as well for an old girl. So you'll be able to, I don't know, WhatsApp or FaceTime or whatever you want you to do. You know what I mean? It can be arranged.
Wonderful.
So yeah, no problem at all.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for a great chat. I mean, they certainly run the gamut, which I'm a little jealous of, especially probably the UFO settings. I'm like, well, if I had one, maybe my mind would be a little changed on the UFO subject, but it's still fascinating to me, of course. But I just thank you for being willing to come forward and share these. And anybody listening, in regards to any of the stories, if you have any information or you come across something that might be of interest to Ian, please send it my way so I can forward that to him. Well, Ian, thank you so much.
You absolutely will.